My name is Colby Martin, and I'm the pastor of worship and arts here at the Grove in Chandler, Arizona. And I've been leading worship for about 10 years now, and in those 10 years it's been in a variety of different contexts and settings, from really small churches to large churches to big youth gatherings or small fireside times of worship. And one thing that's intrigued me over the years is how different churches do their worship on Sunday morning. I'm not just talking about the classic worship wars, rather how churches use technology in their worship, and more specifically how they use lighting and video in their worship gatherings. Recently I've had the chance to sit down with a couple worship leaders here in the Phoenix area, as well as a guy whose full-time job is to design worship environments. And I asked him, how do you use lighting? How do you use video on your worship gatherings? But not just how, I want to know why. Why do you use lighting like that? Why do you use video in that way? What are some of the driving values behind those decisions to use technology? And so I want to invite you to join me as we have these discussions and explore the theological implications behind using lighting and video in corporate worship gatherings. First, I sat down with Brian Wurzel. Brian's the worship leader at Cornerstone Church in Chandler, Arizona, where every weekend 6,000 people gather together to worship, requiring quite the effort on Brian and his staff. I was curious to know how a quote-unquote mega church used lighting in their worship gatherings.
So our lighting is very 21st century technology, everything from your standard par can to moving intelligent lights and everything between. You may find a laser in here every once in a while, maybe not.
This is CJ Bergman. CJ leads worship at Mission Church in Gilbert, Arizona. The Mission has seen crazy growth in the past few years, leading them to open a brand new worship auditorium so that their 4,000 attendees each weekend could all worship together. Now, Mission's auditorium is similar to Cornerstone's, but it's a little bit smaller and feels a little more intimate. So how do they use lighting during their gatherings?
For lighting, for the most part, we're just using still gel lights, a bunch out front of house and then a bunch right above the stage. And then we have probably 4 or 5 intelligent lights, but we use those pretty sparingly. Our approach is fairly minimal and subtle in that sense with our lighting. So we're just kind of using it to create vibe and create color, but it's really not very dynamic.
The third worship leader I sat down with is Brian Whitman, who leads at Poema Church in downtown Phoenix. And Brian Whitman has been a longtime guitarist for the Christian rock band Audio Adrenaline, but in the past few years has been a part of this urban church plant. I was curious about the perspective from a guy who spent years on the road in major productions and is now a part of a small church plant of just 125 people. How does a church like Poema use lighting?
At Poema Church we use, it's pretty minimal. We use just a handful of par cans without gels at this point, and some 60-watt GE bulbs dangling from the ceiling and a few IKEA lamps.
This is Nate Griffin. Nate runs a production company out of Nashville, and his job is to help create an artistic environment for events such as concerts and parties and worship gatherings. I wanted to get a non-worship leader's perspective on using lighting in worship.
I want to create an environment that really allows us to set a mood and to create a journey throughout the entire evening. I approach that very holistically. I look at the side walls, I look at the back wall, I look at the seating, I look at the stage, the ceiling, every part of that.
So there you have 4 different perspectives on the use of lighting. But what about video? How do these guys use video in their worship gatherings?
There isn't a particular thing that I like to use. It's very much determined by the space that we're in. Something that's become a really popular trend is something called environmental projection. And basically what we do is we again look at the entire room as the palette for the projection. So rather than confining our imagery to the basic 16 by 9 or 4 by 3 screen, we literally take the projection and pixel map it or paint it across the entire wall surface. And so suddenly we're transporting a forest or a pattern of stained glass or an ocean or whatever into the entire room. And it becomes sort of this vast landscape that we can manipulate and control with the click of a button.
We primarily use it to run the lyrics, usually white text on black, and we throw it right on the wall, and then sermon notes, passages, images that are used during the sermon to kind of for key elements.
With video, we've got basically 3 different themes or approaches with our video. We've got a center screen, large center screen in the middle, and then we've got side screens just on the outside of that center screen they match each other. And then beyond that, on the outside walls, the wide walls, we have what we call environmentals. So center, sides, and environmentals, those are our 3 different schemes. And my goal with the center screens is to basically tell the story visually of what we're singing about for the most part. So if we're singing Desert Song and This Is My Prayer in the Desert, you're going to see a video of desert. The side screens have the lyrics on them, and they kind of match the center for the most part, and they're just kind of subtle. And then the environmentals, those are used the same way kind of dynamics in a song would be used, where there's moments of that song where it's just like really huge dynamically. We kind of supplement the environmentals with those moments in the song. There's a commanding visual presence in the room to kind of surround the worshiper and kind of invite them into something bigger than themselves.
So our video experience is a pretty unique environment that way. We have a video wall. I want to say the dimensions, don't quote me on this, but it's close to like 40 foot high by, I think it's almost 40 feet wide. It's a video wall in the middle. It's kind of a centerpiece of the stage. Most of the time those have some really cool creative visuals that are moving backgrounds, that kind of stuff. Again, tied into the lighting scheme. It's all kind of intentionally tied together. We also do use iMag on the weekends.
We're singing how marvelous, how...
And I know there's a lot of debate about iMag, especially in the church context, but I would say that I really like the way we use iMag here. We use it in a creative way. Ultimately, I think the end goal is how do we help the person sitting all the way back where we're sitting right now, the back of the auditorium, connect with me as the worship leader and connect with the team or with the teaching pastor or whoever.
So some of the common themes that emerged when talking about using lighting and video in worship settings was for lighting. It seems pretty common to light the stage very well, whether that's with static par cans or intelligent moving lighting, whatever it is, ambient lighting, but the stage is lit well, whereas the house is pretty dark, and there's quite a contrast there. And then with video, it seems very common to use video projection as a way to put lyrics on the screen, but also a lot of the guys were using images, whether that's moving or static, but some way to visually tell the story of what we're singing, to complement the lyrics of the song with the visuals, so that we're engaging with our eyes, not just with our mouth and our ears. And so then I wanted to find out, okay, why? Why are you lighting it like that? Why are you showing videos in that way? Why are you projecting shots of the band on the big screen? What are some of the driving values and decisions that drive what you're doing with lighting and video?
You know, I think on initial build of this facility, I think it was birthed out of, this is kind of where 21st century church is going. I don't know that it was all spirit. It was that it was all the spiritual kind of girth in terms of the intention of why we built the way that we did. Although I will say that with intentionality, that it would connect in a relevant way, that it wouldn't be this space that people walked into and went, oh, this is church how I remember it, you know, but that it was an experience that was relevant to them. We've had people over and over and over come in, and part of the draw here is, man, there's something different about how you connect with us, and then ultimately how I get to connect to God. You know, practically on the iMag side, you know, I think it wasn't a spiritual decision either necessarily. It was more of a sightline issue. We wanted to make sure that people were able to see. The pastor stands out in front of people on the wings, and so how do you bring that connection when he's not looking at them and preaching at them or to them, eyeball to eyeball, that they still have some sort of eyeball to eyeball connection. And I think the iMag really helps bring that in.
I feel like what we're doing is, through video, giving people a hymnal. So they're not holding anything, but there's not a whole lot else other than just the lyric that they're going to be singing, or during the teaching time some key scripture, maybe some photos or images that kind of help move people through the message. And we kind of keep things pretty simplistic. And I think, again, it might be just my rebound from being involved with so much more high-tech stuff in my past, which I thought was work from an entertainment point of view, but not from a worship point of view.
I think for me, I feel like the visuals are a part of my job as a worship leader, just like I'm choosing songs. And so I think the idea would be, like I said, if we're singing a lyric and we can look at something that connects us more to what we're saying, because man, for me, worship, a lot of the songs we're singing in here is saying and singing truth about God, and our goal is to glorify Him in doing that. So I think the burden is on me every week to go, okay, is this visual going to really help people connect, or is it not going to?
I can safely say that the reason I do that is because that's what I feel called to do. This is where God has given me opportunity to be a blessing. My background is painting as an artist, and this is very close to that, and there's something within me that responds to imagery. When I'm able to bring other people in on that, to experience what I experience, for me that is the motivating factor. For me that's how I worship. I can't sing a note, I can't play a note, but I can make pretty pictures, and I can display them in such a way that other people can enjoy that and engage with that and respond to that with me. And so that's what I'm going to do.
I think for us leaders of worship, one of the tensions that we feel is, how do we use technology? How do we use the tools that are at our disposal to potentially create a more powerful, meaningful, moving, engaging, impacting experience or event or opportunity for the Spirit of God to be present and full and rich? How do we use these tools without letting the tools use us, without it being more about the lights and more about the video than about the creator of light and the creator of the world? In his book, Flickering Pixels, Shane Hipps challenges the reader to think through some of the things that are being said without actually being said. He talks about, and it's been said, that the medium is the message. And in our church services, we can't be so naive as to think that our message can stay the same, but the medium can change, without realizing that as soon as we change the medium, the message itself gets changed. We may be trying to accomplish one value with lighting or video, but without knowing it, we're also communicating a different value. And so these are some of the things that I was curious if these guys have explored any of the dangers or the pitfalls of using lighting or video in these ways. Have they gotten any feedback of people that have said, you know what, this is what actually was communicated? And so let's see if they have anything to say for that.
It's so subjective. For one person, you've distracted them and taken them out of the game. For the other person, you've engaged them and brought them in.
Yeah, I definitely think that there are downsides to any use of technology.
Somebody cueing lyrics 2 seconds too late, that's incredibly distracting. They're not leading people, they're inhibiting people from worshiping.
If it helps to drive people closer to Christ, to the optimum worship setting, then I'll do it. But if it becomes just a, hey, we've got the money, let's do this because it looks cool, I don't want to do that.
There's some general dangers. Of course, entertainment, right? People are inundated with stimulus activity through media constantly. They're just busy. There's noise and there's motion and pictures constantly. They're being inundated with that. So you could argue, man, they come into a sacred space where they can engage the Lord. Man, let's strip all that away and make sure that there's no distraction.
Distraction. That word keeps popping up. And I think that every one of these worship leaders are trying to eliminate distractions so that the people who come on Sunday mornings can really engage with their Creator, with Christ, in authentic worship. But the irony is that sometimes the very things, the tools that we use to eliminate distraction, sometimes, if we're not careful, can become a distraction in and of themselves.
I think it can end up looking like a show. And we hear that a lot from especially from people that maybe aren't necessarily in relationship to Christ yet. You know, it's like, man, it's like going to a rock concert, you know, and in one part of your heart, you're like, oh man, this is like, it almost hurts to hear that. But on the other side, it's like, man, we have an opportunity to share the story of redemption with that person that thinks this is just a rock concert.
Where I've seen so much destruction happen is actually more within the context of the team that's responsible for displaying all of these things, as opposed to the congregation that's walking in. When it's more important to get the perfect shot or to have the to-the-second video cue than it is to support and encourage that kid that is passionate about being up there and running those visuals or those lyrics, or is learning on the soundboard, you know, and just getting obliterated afterwards because he made a mistake, then that's when we have an issue.
If we're cultivating an environment where people come in and they're entertained and they're going, man, that was a really cool video, or that was really cool lighting, or I love that piece of what you did, and there's somehow they're consuming worship and they're getting in worship rather than giving to and worshiping and sacrificing for the object of our worship, which is the Lord, then I think we have a problem.
We've kind of found what works for our church, and it's a lot less than some churches and a lot more than others.
There needs to be, especially as leaders in the church, I feel like there needs to be a broader acceptance of the use of technology in spaces. And although the Presbyterian church down the street may not adopt the same technology that we've built here in the 21st century, that there's a healthy respect for the purpose, that there's a purpose that this local community is using the technology for, and that it's not all about a show, but that it does have a greater purpose, and that the gospel is moving ahead.
Brian McLaren, in his book, A New Kind of Christianity, has helped me to come to terms with the fact that within the body of Christ, we talk about diversity. But even within types of churches, I think there needs to be a healthy respect for the different types of churches that exist. Sometimes my own spirit can become critical of other churches and how they do their worship. And yet, if I'm honest, I need to step back and realize that there are probably things about the way that I do worship that others would find distracting or frustrating or strange. And so I think one of the calls for the church in the 21st century, as we wrestle with the theology of technology, is to really give space for diversity within the body of Christ and how churches meet and express their corporate worship. And learn to see that church is meeting a certain need that this church over here isn't. And that's a beautiful thing. And they don't have to do it in the same exact way. What I love about each of these guys is I know them, and I know their hearts. And I know they're desperately seeking to worship the King with all they are. And they're hoping that others would catch on and follow them. And I think that when we begin to criticize how churches do their worship, we might lose sight of the fact that at the heart of that is a man or a woman who's desperately seeking a way to reach that community, reach that culture. And they may not get it right every time, but that's okay. That's where grace comes in. And so I've really enjoyed this project to explore the use of lighting and video in the church. And I think what it's helped me see is that though I may have a way of doing things here at my church at the Grove, that God is uniquely working in the lives of men and women all around the globe, and helping them to establish a theology of technology. So as we move forward into the 21st century and beyond, and as new technologies emerge, as new churches are constructed and new designs of lighting and video are created, may the grace of God be with us as we do the best we can with the tools we're given to pursue worship in spirit and truth. And may God guide us as we use the tools and don't let the tools use us. And may we show grace and mercy to the churches around us who may do things just a little bit differently, because in the end, I think that's okay. And I think it makes the church, the bride of Christ, just a little more beautiful.
Somehow, let hope arise and make the darkness hide. My faith is dead, I need a resurrection. Restore not dead. He's surely alive and he's living